Now on to President Yoon Suk Yeol's recent trip to New York. His week-long trip included attending the UN General Assembly and holding talks with dozens of world leaders on the sidelines to promote Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. This was an opportunity to broaden South Korea's diplomatic network and solidify status as a global pivotal state. For more on the trip's highlights and significance, we have our presidential office correspondent, Oh Soo-young, here in the studio. Good morning, Sooyoung.
Hi, Kyung-eun.
Hi. So let's first get a recap of President Yoon's trip to New York.
Sure. So President Yoon's speech at the UN, let's start with that. That set out South Korea's action plan to contribute to global peace and prosperity by dealing with the biggest challenges facing the world. He identified what he called the three divides, or disparities that we're seeing between the global haves and have-nots. One was the climate response, helping countries without the capacity or technology to make the green transition. And second, narrowing the digital divide, with President Yoon separately at New York University proposing a new digital Bill of Rights that addresses the need for the fair and ethical use of digital technology in order to benefit rather than harm humankind, and is also capable of being developed by a broad range of innovative players instead of enriching and empowering just a select few. To address the wider scope of the global divide, as he put it, the government has increased its budget for official development assistance next year by over 40%, as the president noted in his speech. And as South Korea's masterpiece, if you will, on presenting solutions for the present and the future based on its own past developmental experience, President Yoon again pitched for Busan City's bid to host the 2030 World Expo, meeting with nearly 50 countries during his 5-day stay. Now, these include countries South Korea has never held summits with in the history of its diplomatic relations, including members of the Caribbean community, for instance. So that really opened up new diplomatic and possible trade channels for the country as well.
Right. Now on to President Yoon's UN speech. What garnered particular attention was his direct warning against Russia and North Korea over a potential arms deal. How should we read into this?
Well, that really made clear that President Yoon is firmer than any other South Korean leader previous to him that he will not tolerate third countries that enable North Korea's nuclear missile threat. Now, leading up to the General Assembly, Yoon has urged all countries to properly enforce sanctions against the regime in line with UN resolutions and warned against any military cooperation with Pyongyang without specifically naming a country. But after Kim Jong-un's summit with Vladimir Putin the weekend before the General Assembly, Yoon called out Russia directly, saying that it is, quote, paradoxical to be a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, yet enabling a country sanctioned by the Council's own resolutions. Now, here he added that Moscow has instigated war against Ukraine, which he says is also directly threatened by the Russia-North Korea collaboration.
And this is more concerning, which is that this is more than just a transaction, that this is about Russia and Korea elevating their relationship to one of not a formal alliance, but something close to it. It's going to become more like North Korea. And this is very concerning because North Russia would then behave more like a rogue state, such as transgressing and violating international norms, especially norms such as non-proliferation.
So South Korea's message was that it's also standing up against threats against peace, not only for its own interest, but for the freedom and security of other democracies in the world, like Ukraine, as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for a 2-year term beginning next year.
Right. In that regard, President Yoon joined other world leaders in calling for a reform of UN Security Council, which is the most powerful body in the UN. Tell us more about that, please.
Right, so Kyung-eun, the Security Council uniquely has the power or the authority to produce legally binding resolutions within the United Nations system, which requires all of its permanent 5 or P5 member states, including Russia and China, to reach a consensus. In other words, a P5 member could potentially block any resolution from being passed, and that has been the case in recent years, with Moscow and Beijing ignoring global calls to condemn and further sanction North Korea's provocations, such as its missile and satellite launches. According to a presidential official, the P5's veto rights have led to a gridlock within the council, which has not only directly impacted South Korea's security, but also worsened the effects of the war in Ukraine, sparking food and energy security crises, not to mention crises in global supply chains and financial stability as well. Now, the leaders of the United States, Japan, the EU and Ukraine also endorsed the idea of reforming the Security Council in order to either remove the veto system or expand the permanent membership, as the decades following the creation of the Council in 1945 after the Second World War have seen vast changes, such as the fall of the Berlin Wall, the financial crises of the 2000s, and also the rise of new emerging powers, such as Germany, India, even South Korea and Brazil.
So if United Nations wants to remain relevant in these days and age, and it's very important for United Nations to reflect the reality in the relations and on the ground in the international community. And also institutionally, it means that new powers are going to have new voices, and I think it's going to send a strong signal to the rest of the world that the powers shouldn't be taken for granted.
So in a way, it strengthens South Korea's case for acting as a global pivotal state.
Right, it reinforces that message President Yoon has consistently given for global solidarity as Seoul looks to engage more deeply beyond the Korean Peninsula, not only to procure cooperation on countering North Korea and expanding its trade network, but also to help shape new norms in this ever-changing world so that they align with the liberal democratic world order.
I think for a while, South Korea was just focused on South Korean things. But as a global pivotal state, talking about values and human rights, universal norms, President Yoon has taken on a regional and global role that I can't remember any other South Korean leader doing. And you could see the welcome that he got at the White House, the state dinner, the speech at Congress, the Camp David summit. I think South Korea is front and center in President Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy and a very trusted partner and ally.
Some observers say South Korea is stepping out of the shadows, not only backing Washington's initiatives, but taking leadership in areas of common global concern, becoming a responsible player in the international community.
President Yoon is not a junior partner. And in many ways, the initiative is his to do things that even you and I may not dream of. And this is the key. Whispering in the halls of the General Assembly and the various missions to the UN are the fact that, hey, you know, this South Korean president, you know, look what he's doing and look what he's saying and look all the heads of leaders that he's meeting. So, I mean, and that's what's important. It's not what they say in the open diplomatic fora. It's the buzz. It's the buzz that's going around. So President Yoon is doing the right thing. But with that comes also great responsibility.
Particularly with the United States and China locked in geopolitical rivalry on multiple fronts, from infrastructural projects across the Indo-Pacific and technological competition, South Korea is strengthening multilateralism, calling for values like freedom and a rules-based world order, while also proposing reform in areas where new norms are needed.
All right, Sooyoung, thanks for coming in today.
My pleasure.